Hello and welcome back to a brand new series of Life Sci AI, the podcast series. And as you know, this series is going to be all around drug discovery and how AI and other innovative approaches are being harnessed to push forward either drug discovery pipelines, platforms, or new ways of dealing with the challenges within drug discovery. And to kick off this episode, we have a really special company, a startup based in the UK called Kuano. And Kuano are looking to combine state-of-the-art simulation and AI to add quantum detail to the structure-based drug discovery. Now, we have the CTO and co-founder David Wright with us today to talk all about Kuano's journey, but also his specialism in this area. And why he thinks that the inspiration of quantum computing can be utilized to harness drug discovery and push it forward. So welcome to the podcast, David. Great to have you on.
Hi, it's great to be here.
So let's sort of have a first off an introduction. So tell everyone a little bit about yourself, your role, and I guess how you got into this position at Kuano.
Yeah, so way back when I was a sort of computational physicist in my undergrad and sort of left that space wanting to do something more applied in some way and ended up coming to UCL in London to try and use computers to understand how small molecules bound to their targets on a sort of physical level. And that sort of gradually evolved into a position where I was interfacing a little bit with drug companies and also doing the simulations, but also looking at how machine learning allows you to use physical simulations to knit together our understanding of the world with data. And with my co-founder Vid, who comes at it from a very different physics angle, we came up with this idea of being able to target particular types of drug targets. Those that have those are called enzymes, which are sort of biological machines that do some chemistry. And by understanding that chemistry better, you can find out that in the middle of a reaction, they bind whatever they're doing a reaction with incredibly tightly. And that should give us a sort of template for perfect drugs. And that is sort of the answer to a problem that everyone else who are thinking about the problem from an AI approach going, I need to generate all of this data, and that's how I work out what sticks to my target well. We can replace that with a physics-based model. And so our dream is to sort of put together this idea of having very detailed models of how enzymes work and machine learning to generate new and interesting different chemistry that people haven't seen before to find sort of the ideal drug to just hit the precise target you want to hit. And so the company has these two sides really of like things that come from a physics-based world and looks towards for inspiration towards quantum computing, and then this much more, I guess, well-known aspect of looking at how AI and sort of generative models from that side can help us understand chemistry.
All right, awesome. So it's like a fusion of sort of quite innovative, brand new areas of physics going into drug discovery, and what people have been doing in the past sort of 5-6 years with ML and the utilization of that.
Yeah.
Where would you say you are though? Just to sort of go before we go into Kuano and a little bit about you, David Wright. Did you ever think you'd be a co-founder? Did you ever think you would be, as you are in a company, or have you fallen into this position, I guess?
No, I don't think I'd ever have thought I'd have become into this sort of co-founding position. I think I moved from very much wanting the dream of research and wanting to do things, but then ending up in the much more practical, how do I make a computer do this thing, part of that space. Yeah. And in a way, that kind of, so there's a movement in sort of computational science and computer science called research software engineers, and I sort of fell into this space of doing more of the software engineering, more of the sort of support work, and a little bit, and like different volumes of science and some additional work looking into projects which were sort of trying to bring big collaborations of people together. So it's more of a networking sort of thing. And then I went out into my first job in another startup where, trying to apply all of that in a sort of industrial setting became the goal. And then once you've sort of put all these things together, you're really sort of doing already that role of all of the hats you wear when you become a founder. And so when the opportunity of having a really exciting idea of putting these things together, which would sort of use all these skills I'd built up over the years, and then move forward into both the things that are really exciting are having the control of being the person who's sort of setting the strategic direction behind these things, and then actually trying to solve the problems. You're not like driven by so in the academic space, you're like, there's always, you need a publication, or like someone else's, for the sake of this project, you must get interested in this widgety thing. Here you go, we at some point need to find a drug. What are the fewest number of steps we can get from having just a computer to having a real drug, which we've tested in as far as we can take it along that pipeline, and then eventually into patients.
Yeah. So like more of like an impact rather than like a white paper or publication.
Exactly, yeah.
No. So what would you say when forming Kuano, your purpose was?
So I think I guess I can speak for myself, which is exactly the purpose of Kuano is to get better drugs and to really feel that connect. Like for me personally, that sort of creative, showing that creative bridge that you've actually managed to put something into the world with your knowledge of things. And I think across the team, that's pretty close with everyone's different angles on it. I think so. We have a couple of people who come from a medicinal chemistry background, or some from CROs, people who make the compounds, but being able to see the journey from beginning to end and having to know that it was your impact on the world, I guess. And the purpose there is, like, from my perspective, there's something really interesting about you can do it differently, right, to everybody else, and taking this slightly different angle, proving it out, having that kind of feeling of ownership, but also of the excitement of innovation, I guess. There's something really nice about doing it differently and being the first people to try a new way.
Yeah. So with that, like, is it with the Kuano technology, are you drug agnostic, or do you have a particular area of drug or of therapeutics that you are particularly looking at targeting?
So the technology is, so within the realm of enzymes, which are sort of everywhere within biology, but they're their only targets. So we wouldn't look at receptors or other sort of parts of that matrix. It could be anywhere. What we decided was, both because of everyone wanted to feel an area which you wanted to really push for, and also just there's kind of good targets in the space, is that we're aiming for sort of oncology targets initially, and we have some specific classes of enzymes that work nicely with our platform as it is now. And so within that, I think our first target is going to be a bowel cancer drug development project. The long-term dream is you have a platform that would probably look up from the type of biological target you want, and then find the therapeutic areas which are most useful and we can have the most impact. So we wouldn't want to be constrained at this early stage in our development, but I think there's a real case to be had that there are two areas where it naturally fits, which are within cancer, partly because it's sort of everywhere, and therefore the type of things which interact with so either small signaling peptides or DNA they're the type of enzymes that work well for us, or alternatively in sort of antimicrobial things. That's the sort of area which people have had success in the past. So one way of looking at what we do is it's automating something that's called transition state drug design. And the area where that's most proven out, it would be in something like HIV therapeutics. And the sort of question for us is, this is an area whereby there are huge potential opportunities, and if the funding arrived there, that would be an amazing area for us to work with huge impact. Yeah. But right now, like, that's not as easy to prove yourself out because it's not as much money, and it's not easy to test it out. And that would be, but I think that may change, and we'd be really interested in moving in both those.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Thinking about like impact and purpose, sort of a slightly philosophical question. There's no right or wrong answer to this one, and you can absolutely fall on a fence as well if you wish to. For you, would you go for a smaller impact across a larger population size, or a larger impact on a smaller population size?
I mean, so I think it's hard, like, because I think it's very easy to say that, like, to think about the endpoints of, like, are you saving lives or are you treating some sort of chronic illness in that space? And I think it's much easier to know that you've succeeded in the kind of saving lives end of that spectrum. I think
Very binary.
Binary, yeah. And I think these, you know, like you get the stats easier. And it's kind of like, whereas I think one of the things that is underappreciated is how important it is to have that impact on everyone's life all of the time and do these things. And it's also one of the things which, if we manage to make the dream machine that we want, so the idea is that you have these, the advantages of doing it the way that we do it is that you'd start out from a position where you have incredibly high potency, so you stick to the target you want and you don't hit anything else because it's bespoke to that particular target. The advantage of that is actually that should make a drug that you can take. You know, you do relatively small amounts for a long time and have none of the side effects. So for me, that all sort of lines up to the dream where I think we would be have the most unique impact, and therefore the thing that I currently think would be most exciting if in the long run would be to get into that space of doing these kind of lots of what seems like a smaller impact across lots of people. But in realistic terms, I think pragmatically, knowing that you've made the impact means that the exact other end of going, let's do a cancer drug and show that we've extended life by 6 months or whatever is the
No, that's always, and it's something that I always ask people as well, like, because some platforms are there for a large number of people to be accessed and to make those, you know, those small differences. They're going to like medical devices, back to medical devices. Gleamer, very successful imaging company for fractures. So it's like very small in terms of impact AI on there, but on a large scale, it can make a huge impact to a lot of people. And then we also at Cypro work with a lot of rare disease companies, and that's like big impact on a very small sector of the population. So it's super interesting to delve into that. But before we just sort of go into, I guess, just explaining the problem of sort of what Kuano are looking to solve and what your technological solution is, before we jumped on this podcast, we were just chatting offline about sometimes, and I made exactly the classic mistake of, you know, what is quantum computing in relation, and you know, how are you utilizing it and such. So people also might have the same viewpoint as me, or misconception of me around what is quantum, why is it being used, and the definition of it in this scenario. So it'd be great for you to contextualize quantum and also simulation as well, and what it means for you and bringing physics into this realm.
Yeah, so I guess the best starting point is to sort of explain somewhat where we use quantum in two different ways too often, I think, maybe in our way of thinking. So one of which is quantum mechanics, in the sense, which is the sort of fundamental physical understanding of how the world works, and specifically how very small things and therefore chemical reactions work. And the simulations that we use every day are based on trying to model the world at that level. So understanding how the sort of electrons in the atoms move around during reactions and how that changes their properties. And so when we want to follow an enzyme from the beginning of a reaction to the end, we have to use a model that includes some element of quantum in it. Otherwise, we just fundamentally couldn't get that right. Yeah. And the other part of what we talk about is quantum computing. And my co-founder, Vidswich, whose background came from how do we try and describe this type of quantum description of the world using new methods in computers, that specifically being quantum computing. And in this idea of quantum computing, you want to make either a special purpose or even a general purpose computer that, rather than using zeros and ones like normal computers, uses a more complicated, sort of basic description of the information it's working with. And because it's based on the same type of entity, like a not 0 and 1, but this sort of distribution of states, which is exactly the same as that underpins the way that chemistry works, there's kind of a feeling that it should naturally be the first application of a quantum computer should be doing quantum simulation, so things like chemistry.
Yeah.
In reality, the problem with doing that is that the quantum computers we have now are small, and the chance of getting a quantum computer doing anything of the sort of scale we want to look at is sort of 5 to 10 years away. There are quantum computers now, but the getting to do the number of calculations we want or the style of calculations is you know, that distance away into the future. Yeah. What has happened in the last, I mean, I say 5 to 10 years, but it's not really my area. So it's come to my attention in the last 5 years, I guess, is a more is people coming up with algorithms that might work on future quantum computers that can be run now on what we'd call classical computers, the computers we have today. And what some people have found in some of these algorithms is that treating the system in a different way with the idea of getting it onto a quantum computer one day has made their code more efficient, or to be able to find different solutions that weren't found by using the ways we were working before. And so this is where we're taking inspiration from quantum computing, and so what ends up being called quantum inspired solutions. And so that's one of the ways that we'd like to go beyond what other people are doing. Like, there's lots of very standard ways of simulating quantum systems that everyone has access to. And there's kind of a quite well-known sort of relationship between the amount of compute time you have to put in to get a certain level of accuracy. And what we'd like to do is go beyond that by using new methods, or alternatively to use understanding from like one slightly less incredibly expensive calculation using a new method that allows us to improve our cheaper methods. And that's where we're putting these sort of quantum inspired methods and working on that in order to help us refine the methods we use every day.
No, that's awesome. Thanks for the explanation. Definitely something that man off the street Nick made an error on. So hopefully I'm not the only one. So define the problem that, and you've probably mentioned it here and there so far though, but define the problem that Kuano are solving.
I mean, I guess one way of thinking about it is that as we get better at diagnosing diseases, there are more and more diseases that we understand how we could, in theory, solve. And so there are two parts of trying to solve that problem. Either you firstly, once you understand, you need to understand the biology so that you get it and solve it right, and that's not the problem we look at. But in terms of what do you want to do in terms of giving someone a treatment, ideally what you want is to give them a drug, right? Something that's really easy to take every day and get to the right place, and all of these sort of things. And we would say that there's a real problem, which is just a chemical problem, whereby you need to design and engineer a small piece of chemistry that gets that hits the specific bit of biology that you want to affect very precisely. What we sort of believe is that there is a fundamental way of looking at that, which is that if we pick one particular type of biology, which is everywhere and involved in all of these systems, which is enzymes, doing the chemical reactions in all biological processes, then we can use physical models to understand what they do naturally. And then that's the best way to try and stop them, is to understand how they work naturally, and then find the places where they're most vulnerable in some sense to being stopped, and design a very specific blocker for each individual enzyme target. And we, like in general, the problems that people face when trying to do this by sort of all of the other methods in our, we're going to make the broad claim that everyone else is wrong in some fundamental sense, which this is not a mechanism that people have been trying to do this for years. And actually they've done it very precisely by spending an enormous amount of time and money on experiments that follow the actual atoms in real experiments. And they've found that they can make very nice drugs with the type of properties that we're trying to claim we would get from a computer. But the advantage that we claim is that we can do it with any target. We don't have to have years of specific knowledge about every individual target to develop a new experiment. We can just put it into a computer in the dream world and run the reaction, and then we can use that to get us this template to do drug design. And we can use AI to do something that people struggle with, which is to find genuinely new chemistry. And that's why AI has been so, well, it's been so successful in being able to make it very efficient to, once you know what you want, to get to that more quickly. And what we're saying is if we can use the physics models to find out what we want, then we can use these very efficient AI methods to get to that place of some chemistry that does it, and get over this problem which everyone else has, which is if your way of defining what's good is by data from something that's already good, then you have to have already known what's quite good to get to the next step of what's better. And so we hope that by saying, we get around that problem by saying the definition of good comes from our physical modeling rather than from data that you know. And that allows us to sort of let the computers dream of very exciting chemistry, and then to find the best of this much bigger space. And I think like what people struggle to what I still struggle to understand is quite how big the space of possible chemistry is. And so like I looked up the kind of a recent estimate which puts it at like 10 to the power of 60 potential compounds that you could conceive of making. And to put that in some context, that is sort of 25 timesing the number of molecules, all of the molecules in the ocean by 25 times, and that's roughly the same number. And so this is some sort of insane amount of things that you have to conceive of we could make. And this is why the problem in terms of like doing the chemical problem of drug design is so hard, because there are so many possible areas, and what you end up doing is you go to places that you've known work, right, for good reasons, like that will have lots of properties you want, you can make it, these are important properties. But then that also works out to be limiting, and if you know that there is a target you haven't hit yet, like an enzyme that you haven't inhibited yet, then you need to find some new chemistry, and the only way to do that is by going beyond what everybody else is looking
for. I see.
Okay,
okay, so it's kind of like opening up possibilities that us as humans could not think of, because our current solution pathway is based on what we know previously.
Yep,
so
that's exactly.
You're just going, let's just open up the whole bag and figure out after that, right?
That yes, exactly. That's the dream.
On the table, and then use the AI to match the known chemistry with the biology.
With this kind of dream, this sort of ideal, sort of this perfect drug that we know from the physical idea, and can we go and find that somewhere in this sort of because we know what it should look like. And a way of thinking of it is sort of like we have this, I guess like an artist's impression, like the physics gives us this impression of what it should sort of look like, but not the actual thing. So it doesn't give us, it says it should be red here and blue there or whatever, but it doesn't give us what is red and what is blue in those regions. So we need to find the perfect match in something that has, so what the problem that everyone has in the AI space is this part, which is that it's very easy to sort of dream up a set of atoms that look kind of correct, but ones that you can sort of build and would exist in reality. And so this is the challenge that we're sort of currently working through, which is how do you make AI both search this huge space, but also constrain itself to only the space of things we can make, right? So the space I was talking about was just the ones we can make, but it's much easier for a computer to think of even more compounds which we couldn't possibly make. So that's where you need to use the cleverness, and also where it's really important for our company to have not just me who can understand how to make a computer dream crazy molecules, but also have somebody with a very grounded sense of what you could turn into a real compound in a lab.
It kind of goes to the next question then. Who sets the parameters of what the computer is looking at?
So I think that like we drove our company initially by the idea that the parameters of what it looks for are set by what comes out of our simulation. So what we want to say is like, we have this dream of a molecule, a perfect molecule. Let's try and make a perfect molecule, and use all of the technology we can to just fire out streams of possible molecules and then just filter them to look as much like this template as possible. And what you find is it dreams crazy things. And so this is where the parameters have to come from, like they can come from data. So there'll be, we've always found that no matter how well we try and constrain our models by data, in the end, it's really important to have experts in the loop to try and even when you call it sort of active learning, where they're a part of the loop of like saying yes or no to the things that go back into the machine learning model, but equally often just in a very practical sort of going, here is a menu of 1,000 molecules we believe looks really good. Which ones do you think you can make, or can you change them to look not quite as good, perfect, but can be made? That's where you gain a lot.
My thought process is here is if like the parameters are set by humans, right, or like based on data, then that data is what we know now. How is that not similar to, we're now still working on what we currently know based on our old solution pathway, rather than the parameters actually being set by the computer itself?
It's a good question, and like I think that there's always the bit whereby your dream hits the blocks of reality, right? In the like the question is, can we believe that it works more that you sort of inspire people to look to places they weren't looking before, because it's like the way that you take your journey is important to where you end up in a way, right? So it may well be that you have to constrain it by saying you have to know how to put those building blocks together, but you have to have a design, the overall sort of outline of what you're doing. And if you come from if you start with just people trying to dream up how to do it, they'll do it the same way. They'll put the same types of block in the same types of places. And some of this is saying, well, we kind of know that we're sort of really constrained by the blocks that we can make for the amount of money that we can afford. But could we put them together in a much more interesting way that you wouldn't have thought of before? And the real sort of truth is that you go through stages of this development. So what we'd hope is that we gradually sort of expand that places we look at in the early phases and get closer and closer to the point whereby the computer can just dream things that could be made. And the challenge is then for people to understand how to make them. And there's whole areas of people working on that computational program of like, can it tell people reactions they should try and synthesize the compound? And obviously the dream sort of in a few years time would be to join up with that, to go, we have this our machine can come up with crazy dreams which have incredibly high value. Now we need to bring in that technology that tells us how to make it in a more creative way, but you build up to that ultimate endpoint.
So like how would you say then you are to how close or how far along are you on that line to, I guess, like anchoring it back to support on some of the biggest challenges of drug discovery? Like, is this like a long-term piece, or are you still at the phase where we need to create the football field, as it were, and then bring the players on?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. In practical terms, what we've proved that we can do is come up with compounds that we can make, and more than one medicinal chemist has said they wouldn't have come up with that design for that problem. So in a practical terms, we're already at the stage where we can do something useful. And we proved that using sort of relatively constrained ways of making molecules. And the sort of broader point of, can I get close to my dream of making a perfect compound with like this sort of ideal set of properties from the off without really involving another human in the loop? I'd say that's a few years off. And our sort of goal for the next year will be sort of proving out that we can go one step further than we have now, which is to find something that hits quite well to a target in a way people wouldn't expect, to something that hits it even better, but with the parameters of drug design in mind, right? So you need to get it, like I said before, you need to get it to the right place in the body and all these type of external challenges. So you sort of, there's a certain amount of which order do you do these things in? And we've really kind of like the practical way to convince people that we can do it, to get us to have the opportunity to do it in more different spaces, is that you need to sort of keep proving the points of our diversity from what people would think, and also the kind of speed of getting there, right? So in practical terms, that it's all very well me saying I can do this, but if you have to spend £20 million for each compound design, well, you just lock more chemists into a room. It's ultimately going to be the solution every time. And so at the minute, we're in that stage of going, we can do this quite efficiently. And then we have this, but we're competing against machine learning with data, which is, if you can afford to do all of the data collection, is an incredibly efficient process in terms of getting to, that's, a thing that does the basic idea of the job. What we need to do is go further than that and really start proving out these other abilities to be like, where do we have the real advantage? And what that means is that we actually need to do more complicated synthesis. And so this is the challenge for us, is to go from computer dreams to real chemistry, and that involves getting a better bridge. And we have the chemists, we have the people doing that, and we have that there, and it's a case of, to some degree, money and time. and then I can give you a better answer, which is more like yes or no, and not 5 minutes of talking about the possibilities.
No, for sure. I mean, I was going to ask, like, what do you reckon the unlocker will be for you? Where, like, do you think there's going to be a magic moment where you go, right, this is something we can take and go on, we're validated now. This is you've got that first sort of first times when you've created compounds that medicinal chemists couldn't do. But when do you think that mass uptake point would be, do you think?
So I think that so like there's a hoary old canard of the sort of the drug discovery world, which is that it's only a proven target when you've had it in the clinic for 10 years and made $1 billion or something. So there's a certain amount of truth in that, right? That until you have a drug that's really passed through all the stages, then you're always kind of setting your own standard or the standard of the market, I guess, in some sense. And I think for us, we have a pretty clear idea of what it would mean to have something that can be sold as a proto drug rather than being sold to people as a service where we help you get to the starting point of drug discovery faster. And for us, I think that would be the most exciting, like that would be the sort of the moment where we went, yes, it's all been worth it for the last few years working hard in our basements, would be having something whereby everyone would agree that you're now looking at something that you start taking towards people, taking it through, the preclinical trials and into clinical trials. That's where we'd go. That's we really made the massive difference. But I think more practically, we have ambitions to just make the same thing, do the same things we've done now, but slightly better, to the point whereby if you were to say, could I do this with AI? It's not just it's a slightly novel design. It's my molecule is at least as good, if not better, than what you would come up with from that alternative route.
Yeah. So like your nirvana would be to get a drug out there.
Yeah, I think
but you think the VIA piece is going to be like almost like a SaaS platform or a CAS platform, maybe call it.
I think for us, like we would like to, I guess the sort of which as a service type thing do you want to claim to be? And I think we'd like to always be as a sort of like to capture that piece and also to learn as much, to make the rest of the journey as fast as possible. I think it's always going to be a collaborative process. So the software won't be sold out, but we might well work in a collaboration, a partnership with, say, a bigger pharma company who have a much better idea of a target in the first place and have the ability to really scale up that chemistry already in-house, and sort of do all the so when we think about getting closer to the clinic, the first step is to just do assays that prove the sort of things that I've been claiming, like it only hits this one target and doesn't hit everything else in your body. And so those sort of collaborations will be key. And one of the things that's so from a purely scientific perspective, one of the things we'd be super excited to work on is we've been looking at sort of metallo enzymes. So the type of enzymes which are ubiquitous in the body, or like at least there's lots of them in the body, but a lot of drugs that you design against them, they all kind of look the same and therefore stick to all of these enzymes. And so one of our sort of proof concepts was making things that look a bit different. And if we could work with people to show like that early value you have of just going, everything you normally design hits everything. If we can hit this smaller subset, or ideally just the one we're really interested in, that would be a really powerful first step towards showing that what we're doing is genuinely different and adds value.
No, it's interesting. And like on the partnerships piece, have you got anything in the pipeline, especially around that part you just mentioned there? Or
so those more ambitious, so that's sort of in some sense the reason why we want those is they are quantum hard, and therefore they are sort of the sort of things we're striving towards in the sort of middle future, and we're working on. But we are looking at partnerships. So we've been talking to both big pharma and biotech companies, and I think we have a couple of things we really hope come to fruition in the new year. And so we really hope we're ready and we're set up to do partnerships with people now, basically, and that's where we're looking to grow in the next sort of 6 months into having those, because what we think is the business model that will help us and also drive the technology fastest is to have both internal projects which we have control over, so that we know what we're targeting, and then we can pick things like, say I want to in the long term do metallo enzymes. I pick one, even though I know that the chances of me getting to the end of that are somewhat further down the line. But in the meantime, we're picking up validation points of like saying, when do I get new and unexpected chemistry, and what is the hit rate in each of my rounds, and proving this data that then helps us get partnerships, which then gets us to have more experience with different enzymes, and also just to have like in general, you'd expect to fail quite a lot in drug discovery. There's an attrition rate that you need to account for. So the more times you can be working with people and gaining that experience is the better.
Yeah, you kind of preluded to the question I was going to ask, is take it to a business point of view now, and if there's someone in a similar situation to you, or just 12 or 18 months prior to where you are right now, why partnerships have you looked at partnerships, and why would you say there's a difference between going for research partnerships or for industrial pharma and biotech partnerships, and what are the benefits of them?
So we worked in collaboration with an Alzheimer's Research UK project, and I think the advantage of doing that is like one of the things of working with other people. So we're working in the chemistry side of the problem, and there's a biology side, and kind of having that expertise and people who know the system, A, points you in the right direction, and B, kind of gives you a really firm grounding in terms of just telling you when you're way off beam or where they've done things before in the past, right? Like it's very easy to do something new and innovative, or have a new and innovative way to get to an old and played out solution to a problem. And that was super valuable. And having like our team is obviously it's quite small at this stage, and so having external voices in the discussion is super useful. But in terms of commercial partnerships, I guess it's sort of in somewhat exaggerated form of that, right? People have a very clear what is success criteria, and they also bring in really interesting problems, right? They want a hard target done, and they want it done with a budget and with constraints on it. And that's the only way we'll ever get to know what we're doing. I can always wrangle my project to prove what I want in theory, right? And particularly in sort of the VC world, where you're going, can I fake it till I make it? What are the sort of advertising messages I can get out of this project? Whereas what we really want to do is make drugs that work, and one of the best ways is to work with the people who have made drugs that work.
It's a simple world, really, David, isn't
it? And this is and I think that's where obviously you gain a lot of knowledge about the marketplace, right? That you're in, and what are other people doing? What are people comparing you to? So as we grow, we need to show that we're in some ways better than some other people, or at least different in a way that has a meaningful change to the outcome of what we're approaching. And so even trying to get partnerships has been a real learning experience in terms of communicating what we do, trying to work out what we need to prove, and then in the end, just getting closer to people who really think a lot about the biology. So the other side of the problems that we're working with.
Yeah. Awesome. I tell you, it's been really fascinating chatting to you. I think it's an interesting problem, and one that before we got to know you guys, one that I hadn't conceived of and thought was possible. Thought there's like definitely ways of human beings being less than good in these processes, and and the powers of computers will come forward, and hopefully you guys can be at the forefront of that and really be pushing it forward. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast for episode 1 of this sort of special series we're doing. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure being here, and I hope the series is a massive success.